Look, I'm politely begging you. No, like genuinely, I'm asking you to just pause for 5 minutes. Because while you've been busy correcting and obsessing over the perfect alignment in your yoga pose, your body has been broadcasting this secret story about what's going on the inside. And this is a story that you've probably been carrying for days, months, or even decades if you've been practicing for that long. And if you've ever felt like you've been hit by a truck in the morning, or you just feel like, even though you do all of this yoga, you still feel wired but tired at the end of the day, then this video is for you. The truth is, you've been ignoring important signals that are coming from your nervous system. I'm Sushmita, but you can call me Sushi, and on this channel, I help you quiet your racing thoughts through the power of Ashtanga Yoga. And today, I'm not here to fix your pose like any other normal yoga teacher would. I'm here to help you peel back the curtain and understand what's actually going on and what your body is trying to tell you through real life examples from my own students inside my program. So let's dive in. So this is part 2 of our 3-part Mat as a Mirror series. And when you begin to see yoga as a tool for Svādhyāya, as a tool for self-study, you'll find that the mat is actually just reflecting back to us the things that we often carry around. And usually it's easier to just see if your left hip is hiking or if you're not engaged in your arm. And that can then lead us into discovering or questioning what lies underneath this physical manifestation. And sometimes it can be harder to name or tap into what our emotions actually are. So when we see the mat as a mirror, when we go from the grossest, most physical manifestation all the way to an inner inquiry as to what's actually going on underneath, it can help us get more connected with our own feelings, and we can actually do something about it on a physical level to uncouple the feeling and the posture. And so what if so far all that you've been doing isn't actually like a mistake on the mat? It's not just like, you're just not good enough at yoga, but it's rather an adaptation. It's almost like a protective shield that your body has intelligently come up with so that you can avoid feeling that thing or actually being unsafe with that raw emotion or feeling that underlies the way that you're holding the shape. And what if the tension is a physical record? And often we hold chronic tensions in our bodies for days, decades, even our whole lifetime, and we don't even realize it. But the asana kind of brings to the surface what's already there. It's not like, it adds extra tension. It just resurfaces whatever we've managed to bury down so that we can be normal functioning adults in the world. And so if our bodies are really truly crystallized histories of all of our past thoughts and actions, then in the present day, right now, right here, we have a choice. We have a choice to change. We have a choice to not carry yesterday's emotions into tomorrow's meetings. So that's why this is so important. And it's not about fixing your alignment. It's almost like the last step. All you have to do is notice what the feeling and the underlying emotional tone is, and that will give you a reason to practice beyond just being perfect or fixing your alignment and looking good on the surface. So let's get into all of these one by one. Now, right off the bat, when we start our practice, we're confronted with these 2 forward folds, Padangusthasana and Padangusthasana. And the common tendency is, as you can see, is that there's a rounding of the back. It's almost like this attempt to reach the feet. We all want to touch our toes, but there's almost like this stubborn refusal to take an intelligent concession, to bend the knees. Or we have this opposite thing where there's the hunched shoulders, where the shoulders are riding up towards the ears. And this can look like a physical manifestation of mental strain, of anxiety, of trying too hard to just get into the shape. So whether you fall on this end of the spectrum, where you're not actually trying hard enough or giving yourself a chance to reach the floor, you're not using the blocks, or if you're just forcing yourself, you're bending your knees, but the priority is just to try and touch the floor without grounding the heels of the palms, these 2 things are almost an antithesis to the sukham that is required to do this pose effectively. So whichever end of the spectrum you find yourself on, just try and come back to that middle sense of finding ease within the shape. Next up, we've got 𝐸𝐴𝐷𝐷 Trikonasana, the famous triangle pose. And usually we find ourselves either leaning too forward with the armpit not doing enough of the work to lengthen the upper arm. And this represents this eagerness, this impatience, and displays a mind that's racing ahead and not being able to stay in the present moment. It represents a lack of willingness to just be squished between two glass panes, so to speak, and be in that sideways opening. And instead of that, we're trying to incorporate a bit of a forward bend, we're trying to, get deeper into the shape. And all of these actually display a subtle aggression to get to the next pose, because triangle pose is an easy pose, right, relatively, and be in the next thing rather than being fully present and aware of what's happening right now. And so what we need to do is correct these tendencies on an emotional level first, and then you'll notice this leaning the torso forward starts to shift little bit by little bit. And the next common tendency I often see is that we find ourselves hyperextending that front knee. And this looks good because it feels like triangle pose should be this open, expansive, try and occupy as much space as possible asana. But the more refined your practice becomes, you'll notice that it's actually about squeezing back into the center axis. It's about doing less. It's not about doing the most external full expression of the shape ever. And so this represents a forceful, striving mentality that pushes beyond healthy limits, and it lacks a sense of sensitivity and awareness. Next up, we've got Parivrtta Trikonasana, revolved triangle. Now this is a hard pose. Even if you're a beginner or you're advanced, it's very hard to get that hand down and to fully open up the spine. But this represents whenever, you keep losing balance or you notice one leg is kind of shaking, it's a direct physical representation of mental instability or just a distracted mind. And twists always somehow manage to challenge our sense of orientation and our inability to stay centered and stay grounded with our feet and control it from the hips rather than just, immediately working with the spine, but going step by step from the foundation to the hips to the fingertips gives us the sense that our mind is just very easily unsettled when we can't reach the full expression of the pose. Now, the other common tendency I often see is that people begin to sacrifice the spinal length just to get that hand down to the floor. And so because we're so focused on getting the hand down to the floor, our hips get wonky, and it represents this ambition or goal orientation and placing the external goal, which is getting the hand on the floor, over the internal purpose of actually opening up the spine and feeling the full extent of the twist. And then, of course, we have this one, which looks like, toe touches. When we're doing PT in school, I'm sure you've done toe touches. But it's a subtle form of mental and physical avoidance because it's easier to keep the hips level and just try and touch the floor rather than to allow the whole of the hips to rotate, make your spine also rotate forwards. And this is actually a compensation that we create in ourselves. We do this all the time, but it makes the pose slightly easier for us, and it doesn't require us to actually meet the challenge of maintaining those level hips, and this represents And the final tendency I often see is that the front hip begins to sag. And this is a subtle form of mental and physical avoidance. And it's almost like we begin to compensate to make the pose easier so that we can get the hand to the floor, rather than meeting the challenge of maintaining those level hips, of actually working with the spine. And this represents this inability to have integrity when there's increasingly more and more difficult situations. Next, we've got Utthita and Parivrtta Parsvakonasana. These are our side angle positions, and often we don't have enough distance between the feet, which is just like an anatomical or a cue that your yoga teacher would say. But underneath that cue is this physical pattern that the top arm gets limp, and underneath the physical pattern is the mental and emotional correlate of an inability or an unwillingness to express the full-hearted, open-hearted expansion that the pose actually requires. This means that you must trust your legs and your hand to evenly distribute the weight so that that opening can occur and you can actually pull the breath up to the chest. And this represents this feeling of being burdened or lacking energy or lacking the will to actually correct at every stage in the practice, because you either believe you can do it or you can't do it. And this is why it's so important to look at these small details in other people's bodies, so when we see it happening in our own bodies, we can catch it early. And when it comes to Parivrtta Trikonasana, which is the twisted version of the same thing, the back leg can sort of lift off, and when we don't ground the back foot in order to achieve that full twist, it represents a lack of grounding. And mentally, it shows that there's a disconnect from one's foundation and an inability to actually fully commit, and this subtle cheating, this subtle avoidance just represents that there's a difficulty in staying grounded with the truth of where this student is in their practice. And then finally, we've got a few more examples of just this subtle avoidance and cheating. But she is actually a long-term student of mine. She's also a yoga teacher now. But she's forcing the revolved version in some way, even though she's using a block, she's dropped her knee, she's given herself like concessions or ways out. You can still see she's holding the breath because the breath is not fully reaching the chest. You can see there's a rounding of the spine, and there's a forcing of the arm to stay there on the block instead of allowing it to be that third leg of the tripod that allows her to lift the top hand up. And this represents this like refusal to confront where she is on the mat, and it's almost like an aggressive way of pushing through the poses that are difficult. It's an attempt to conquer the pose and force it rather than finding openness and surrender through the breath. Now, all I want to say is these are things that I see. You could be seeing something else entirely. You could think, wow, she's doing it amazingly well, and drop it in the comments down below if you're catching things that I'm not in this moment. But all of these guys have been working for a long time, and these mental emotional correlates still show up underneath the way that they're doing the posture. Next up, we've got Prasarita Padottanasana, which is a wide-legged forward fold. Now, the first tendency I often see is that the legs are really far apart, and this represents this ambition or this ego, this kind of self-aggression to conquer the body rather than working with it. And you'll notice when you come out of the shape, you need to kind of shuffle your feet in slightly. That's when you know that you've gone too far, that you've pushed past your natural limit. And you can see the same thing here. The arms, the elbows are out just because he wanted to get the head down to the floor. And when we see version C, there's a stiffness in the back, but there's a bending of the arms and a hunching of the shoulders and trying to get the strength to do the work rather than actually allowing the openness and the flexibility to do the work. And this actually represents this armor around the heart, this inability to open up, to be vulnerable, to really reveal and open up the chest. That's what it takes to actually do this pose, right? And this represents a deeply held protective pattern of emotional shielding. And so this student could very well work on the tendency first and notice how this reflects back in the asanas. And here you can see she's shifting her weight back into the heels, and if I were next to her, I would stand in front of her just to make her feel safe so that she can tilt a little bit more forwards. You can see there's a lot of fear and hesitation to truly work and shift the body weight forwards, and represents a reluctance to commit fully to the forward momentum that this pose actually requires. And so you can see she's holding back a little bit mentally and emotionally. Finally, we've got the avoidance and the lack of commitment. Here she can go a lot deeper, but she's not really doing that much because opposite to what she's doing, which is way too much, she's just checked out, she's like, I'm done. And so there are subtle ways in which we cheat to avoid the full depth of the intensity of the experience. And this represents a subconscious resistance to face challenges head on, and an unwillingness to just be in the discomfort of what it takes to keep bending the elbows and seeing what happens as you extend the exhale breath. And there's just almost like ambivalence, which is like, whatever, this is just yoga. And there isn't that full sense of commitment that she's here on the mat doing this and actually healing herself. Finally, we've got the feet turning out. This is again a subtle compensation to avoid the full stretch that the adductors will take if she were to do the pose the proper way. And this again represents this mental pattern of just finding the easy way out of real true intensity. Next up, we've got Parsvakonasana, which is an intense side stretch. And as you can see, he's quite capable of going far deeper because his legs are quite straight, but there's an avoidance, a resistance, and a lack of commitment. And again, these are subtle ways that we have to notice how the body is cheating and how we're checking out mentally. When the back leg is bent like this, or if the hands are just spread apart, there's this sense of lack of conviction or resolve that your body can actually mold itself into the shape. And it's almost like giving up too early and disengaging from the foundation that truly supports us in these positions. And finally, we've got the opposite, which is leaning too much into the front leg and letting the hips sag. And this is an aversion to the intense work that's required in the back leg. In this position, the real work is to actually work with the back leg. But it's easier to put a lot of effort in the wrong place and pretend like, you're going into the deepest version of the shape. But actually the real work is in grounding one's foundation while moving forwards. And this can be a lesson in real life as well, right? It's to actually work on your foundation before you reach for that next thing, before you reach for that ambitious goal. And so whatever tendencies you see in yourself as I'm speaking through this video, make sure to write them down and make sure to comment them down below, because then I can see what you're struggling with. And then we've got the 𝐸𝐸 Padangusthasana, which is the hand to big toe pose. Everyone struggles with this, but a common tendency is to lean back or allow this hip to hike or just constantly losing balance. And so when we try and look cool in the shape, we're prioritizing the external goal over the internal integrity that the shape actually requires, which is this zipping up into Samasthitihi. And then we subtly hike because we want to cheat and we want to avoid the direct sensation of how bad we actually are at the shape. And then when we lose balance, it just represents a mind that's wavering, that's not really focused in the present moment. And this is the definition of losing this sense of internal focus. So when we see someone struggling with 𝐸𝐸 Padangusthasana, we can deduce from the way that they're doing the shape all of these subtle underlying emotional tones that they're going through as they're doing the shape. Next up, we've got the Ardha Baddha Padmottanasana, which is the half-bound lotus forward bend. And here you can see there's a hiking of the knee to get the hand to the floor. And this represents a loss of foundation, and it often happens when the mind is consumed with getting this bind rather than actually grounding through that hand. And so this mental tendency to always do the harder, more complex thing rather than just always starting with the foundations can lead to the pose looking like this on the outside. And then we've got forcing the half lotus. Her body is not truly prepared for doing the half lotus, and so you can see there's a rounding in the back and there's an impatience, so she's got both her hands to the floor. And her current state is that she's got some knee issues right now. She's got to be really careful, and it's almost like a violence to do this version instead of staying upright and doing a simpler version. And this is where we begin to focus on achieving this future ideal rather than just going from where we are, working with our bodies, and going from there to the next stage. These patterns that we've been uncovering, dissecting, and talking about today, the rounding of the shoulders against anxiety, the clenching of your jaw against all the things in the world, and the rushing through your transitions through Chaturanga, they aren't flaws. It doesn't mean you're bad at yoga, and it's not just bad form that you can fix with better alignment. These are adaptations, and your body intelligently found a way to protect you in the past when you didn't have any other choice. But you aren't in that past anymore, and you don't have to keep wearing that same crystallized history jacket every single time you step on the mat for your yoga practice. And yoga isn't the ability to touch your toes, as we've clearly seen. It's much more the ability to access this part of yourself, to become connected with your soul and becoming still enough to truly listen to the whispers that your body is trying to tell you. And if something I said today clicked for you, and if you looked in the mat mirror and you realized that your body's been sending you so many signals that you've just been ignoring all this time, then I want to help you start rewriting that script. I've put a link in the description below where you can book a free call with me. It's just a 30-minute chat where I'll see if I can genuinely help you, and if I can, I will invite you to join the Yoga Mastery program. We won't just talk about alignment in classes, we will very much dive into these specific subconscious patterns, and I'll work with you one-on-one to make sure that you aren't carrying that into the rest of your day, the rest of your week, or the rest of your life. So what we've seen so far in this 3-part series is that awareness is the first step, decoding the language of your body is the second, but what is the third one? How do you actually execute this in your practice and dissolve the armor instead of building more of it and repeating those patterns? In the final video of this 3-part series, I'm going to reveal the exact system for shifting your entire internal state while you move through the practice. I'm going to give you even a journaling technique. I hope I didn't reveal too much, but it's the protocol that I use myself, and it's the protocol that I help my students use to actually uncover these blocks and move through them in real time. If you're enjoying these videos, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, hit the notification bell so that you don't miss that video. Thank you so much for watching till the very end, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.